Hello and good evening to another Monday night Q&A session. My name's Sam Donaghy. I'm joined tonight by another one of my colleagues, Chris Thomas. Good evening, Chris.
Evening, Sam. How are you?
I'm good. And how is yourself?
Very good. Another busy day in the office, so to speak.
Another busy day. Do you want to tell the viewers tonight a little bit about yourself and what you do in your role for the NIC?
No problem, Sam. So my name's Chris Thomas. I'm one of the area engineers up in the northeast. I cover quite a stretch of the northeast and some of the outlying areas. Approved contractor, domestic installer, Alexa Part P. Some of you guys may already know me. And I also cover the hazardous area scheme in the north of England and the Midlands.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And you know, I'm always indebted to Chris because he spent a good few months last year, about this time roughly as well, helping us out on the helpline while we had some new members of staff brought up to speed. So yeah, you know, I'm indebted to Chris again for coming in and helping us out on a Monday night. Okay, so we'll start off this evening with what was the question of the week. So that was quite a common one that we get on the helpline. Can I fit a 230 volt fan in zone 1 of a domestic bathroom? So what's your initial thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, so a lot of people get very squeamish about fitting 230 volt equipment into the zoned area, but if you read through section 701, first of all, it covers ventilation equipment, which is what the fan would come under. Also as well, which is an area which a lot of people do forget, is if the manufacturer states that you can install the equipment into that area, and it's perfectly safe to do so. The manufacturer knows the equipment better than what we do or the wiring regulations do. If you think of all the products that come on the market every week, as long as the manufacturer says it's okay, that's fine. 230 volt ventilation equipment is okay in the zoned area, so as long as you always refer to the ultimate guide, which is the manufacturer, there shouldn't really be any issue with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just try and show the audience some pointers on that. So yes, as Chris said, if you go to regulation 701.55, it's got a list of current using equipment that can be installed in zone 1 if it's suitable, and as Chris says, that list includes ventilation equipment, which would be your fan, and then the suitability is confirmed if it's got the right IP rating, if the manufacturer confirms. So yeah, absolutely no issues so long as we tick those two boxes. Okay, another one that we get commonly asked, and it's still a common question: can a new circuit be added to an existing plastic or all insulated consumer unit? Thoughts on that one, Chris?
Yeah, so everybody seems to get it into their heads regarding non-combustible consumer units. Just because something is existing doesn't mean we have to get rid of it or upgrade it, unless of course there is a need to. So if it's showing any signs of damage, anything of that nature, then obviously we would upgrade. If it's the existing equipment, chances are at the time of its installation, provided you can verify this of course, then the equipment will be perfectly safe for use, as long as you check that circuit protection's in order, basic characteristics of the circuit, in terms of overcurrent protection, additional protection. There's no need to upgrade the board just because it's plastic.
Yeah, absolutely, and it boils back to our friend about the fundamental principles. We've got to make sure before doing any additional alteration that the existing installation's adequate for the additions or alterations. So it's one of those, you know, and in general, if we're talking about the plastic consumer unit, if it's still fit for purpose, it provides the correct degree of barrier and enclosure protection, then we're okay. You might recommend that they consider an upgrade, but you know, that's as far as it would go. It would be a recommendation but not a requirement. And following on from that, what kind of advice would we give with regards how we record that situation on the installation certificate for the new circuit that you're adding?
Yeah, so be descriptive with it. It's very, very common. What we find is that people will simply stipulate all in the comment section. And if you're not retrofitting or installing all of the circuits, then you're obviously not going to include that. So be very precise, be very descriptive with regards to what part of the circuit or circuit you are covering. If it's a simple replacement, make a note of it. Be very clear. There's plenty of room in the comments box, so there shouldn't be any reason for you to not fill any comments. And I do see a lot where people don't put any comments at all. If you don't put any comments at all, the old rule of thumb is, well, you haven't acknowledged it. So you need to acknowledge it, and you also need to be very descriptive with your acknowledgement as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Chris. It's an area that we quite often don't use enough. So in that box that says extent of work covered by the certificate, make it clear what you're taking responsibility for, and then also what you're not taking responsibility for. So in this example, we'd want to make it clear that we haven't installed that plastic consumer unit. We've installed a new circuit into it, and then we might comment on the plastic element in the box further down, which talks about comments on existing installation. So there you can mention that it was there already, but you've done everything reasonably practical to verify that it's adequate for continued use, and then that's as far as you need to go. It sort of brings us in a little bit to, quite often people look at the schedule of inspections and then look at the whole of the installation, and really you should only be completing that schedule of inspections in line with the work that you've done. So if you haven't fitted the consumer unit, then the question about that consumer unit and its IP rating and fire rating, you can put not applicable, because it's not part of your installation work. It's another big common error is that people fill in the schedule of inspections looking at the entire installation, whereas really they only need to fill it in to reflect the work that they've carried out and the work that they're taking responsibility for and the work covered by their certificate.
Yeah, if you're not descriptive enough, you may be taking responsibility for somebody else's work, and if that's not up to standard, then you're going to be liable for that.
Yeah, and you know how horrible us electricians are. The next one that goes in and picks up that certificate, he'll give it the old shake of head and who did this, and so nice and detailed on the extent of work covered by your certificate.
Absolutely.
We'll have a look at some of the questions now that are coming into the chat room, and the first one I can see there is a good question. Is there any problem with having an earth rod for a TT system that's inside the building rather than outside? So my initial thoughts would be there's nothing that excludes it at all, and in fact it might be beneficial because it might make the maintenance and the future test and inspection of that easier than if it were outside, where it's perhaps not as well maintained, not as easy to look after, and often gets lost in further work that's done outside. So lots of times patios and things get built over the top of where the earth rod is, and then it's lost forever. So no problem at all. And I've seen it quite a lot, especially in properties that have got a basement, that they'll actually deliberately install the earth electrode into the aperture through the ground floor, or through the basement floor into true ground. So no problems at all. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, just a common question we get, which we could kind of link to earth rods and electric vehicle charging. If you're taking the earthing inside of the building, just a kind of a gentle word of caution is just to be careful with regards to if that earth rod is anywhere near any other earthing systems, just to make sure that they're suitably spaced apart, so not simultaneously accessible, so you've not got two equipotential zones effectively. But from a maintenance point of view, completely agree with you, Sam. Makes it much more accessible. Outside, it's going to be more subjected to the external influences, such as the elements, versus being inside. Not saying it's indestructible inside, because We do know people tend to put floors over the top of
Yeah,
earth rods
true.
and things like that, but it's probably going to be less likely to come into any harm than, say, if it was on the outside where we can't always see what's going on with the earthing system.
Yeah. So no, good question, and response really no problem at all. Somebody's popped in and said IPX5 fan in zone 1. I think the requirement is general requirement is IPX4, so it's protected against water splashing from all angles. IPX5, if you know that it's going to be cleaned by water jets, so perhaps in a non-domestic, in somewhere like a leisure centre, swimming pool, etc., you might need to go to IPX5. Generally, in a domestic installation, you're not normally going to clean the fan with water jets. It's possible, if you've got teenagers in the house, anything's possible.
So do it, absolutely.
Yeah, but generally not a requirement. A good one to clear up, I think, plastic boards. I'm getting so many asks for second opinion where sparks are failing them, giving them a C2. Okay, I think this is again, it's another area where the industry. So we go always by our good friend Best Practice Guide 4, produced by Electrical Safety First, in association with ourselves and lots of other leading organisations in the industry, including the IET, including NAPIT, including Select. So all of the key industry bodies contribute towards Best Practice Guide 4, and the guidance there is that, providing it's fit for purpose, which I think we talked about in one of our earlier questions, then if the plastic or combustible consumer unit is in a sole escape from a property, i.e. a one entrance, one exit flat, or if it's in an area of high combustion risk, for example under a wooden staircase, then we recommend a C3. Anywhere else, we recommend that it's recorded as being plastic or combustible, but don't give it a classification code because it's perceived as not dangerous or potentially dangerous to the users of the installation. So yeah, we're getting an awful lot of calls about EICRs at the moment. Tremendous amount of calls. A lot of them about consumer unit changes that then a second contractor who's going in to do the remedial work is quite rightly highlighting that it's not strictly true. So yeah, worst case is a recommendation, never seen as a C2, unless obviously there's issues around thermal damage, around the enclosure and barrier protection not being provided correctly. But if it's fit for purpose, worst case scenario, a C3.
Yeah, absolutely.
A guest house built in 93 with no RCD protection, would that be classed as a C3 or a C2 on an EICR? So again, if we take the generic dwelling without RCD protection, there are a couple of areas where it would be considered a C2, but the general ones like domestic lighting, cables at a depth of less than 50 mil, those additional protection areas are generally recommended as a C3. So the two areas that we'd recommend a C2, I'd go the first one, socket outlets that can reasonably be expected to supply mobile equipment outdoors. So if we've got sockets on the ground floor in close proximity to exits or entrances, then we'd code those sockets as a C2 with all general sockets as a C3. And then the other area where lack of RCD protection could result in a C2 would be the circuits serving the bathroom where there isn't adequate supplementary bonding. So again, retrospectively, prior to RCD protection, supplementary bonding would have been required in the bathroom. So if there's an absence of both adequate supplementary bonding and RCD protection, then we'd recommend a C2. If there is adequate supplementary bonding, then we'd recommend just a C3 for the lack of RCD protection. I missed anything there, Chris?
I was just going to say a lot of it comes down to common sense and assessing the area. I like to think a lot of the information we can talk about with regards to coding relates to somebody's electrical skill. So one situation, something could be potentially dangerous. Another situation, it may not be as dangerous because of where the location is or how it's being used. So on top of what you've mentioned there, Sam, a lot of it comes down to, dare I say, common sense, using your electrical skill to judge that area. There is no such thing, in my opinion, as a definitive list in every situation. That's why we ask people to be electrically skilled and, dare I say, competent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The guide is just that. It's a guide. It's not a checklist that you
Correct.
can. So you're absolutely right. That there has to be a degree of interpretation of risk, because an unsupplementary light in one bathroom that isn't accessible with anything else isn't an issue, but a light that's not got supplementary bonding in a bathroom that is simultaneously accessible with the shaver socket or the heated towel rail, then that's a different scenario. So yeah, it does have to be considered with the actual installation in mind. So that's a really good point.
Absolutely.
Let's have a look. Is it permitted to use two MET, one in supplier box where main earthing terminals are connected in gas bonding, and another in the consumer unit where are connected main earthing terminal and water bonding? So I think it's saying if you've got, basically, I guess for practicality of termination, they've terminated the water bond into the main earthing terminal, and then they've bonded the gas into the main earth terminal external. So okay, the requirements are that all bonding is returned or made, if you like, back to the MET. But there's wording within 7671 to say that can either be independently or in groups. So for example, if the water bond is taken to the main earth within the consumer unit, so long as then the cable from the consumer unit to the MET is large enough to still carry that bond, then it's acceptable. I think you'd need some additional labelling to make it clear that where your bonds are, and of course where they are bonds, they have to have that electrical safe warning label about not disconnection. But yeah, that's possible. I guess if we're being picky, we only actually have one MET within an installation, so anything else would normally be referred to as an earth marshalling bar. But it is possible to do it, in a big, say for example, warehouse installation. You might have an earth marshalling bar local to where all your services come in, and then bring one conductor to the MET which is close to the electrical intake. So yeah, they don't have to all be individually run directly to the MET. You can group them through marshalling bars, for example.
There's a couple of things I'd add to that, Sam, as well. So when we talk about the main earthing terminal, it's very common to think of one central point. But we've got to remember that the wiring regulations is applicable across a range of industries, not just domestic installations. So we do eventually get all of these, what would you call them, additional main earthing terminals. They will eventually come back to the same point. And you mentioned about the marshalling earth. That's quite a common application you would find in an industrial installation where they've got separate functions and they will eventually come back to the same point. But there's no problem with that as long as they do link together, and there's no danger from different equipotential zones with excessive resistance or anything like that. But that should really be taken care of with inspection and testing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just need to size. So where we're bringing back those grouped bonding conductors, and especially if we're combining that conductor to be a protective conductor and a bonding conductor, as we might do in a distribution circuit, then we've just got to make sure that the protective conductor is sized adequately to be able to perform both functions, because sometimes your bonding sizes are larger than your protective conductor sizes, and vice versa. So yeah, it's just a consideration. Okay, what am I using it for? If I'm using it for both, I've got to consider what's the most onerous requirement and size it based on that onerous requirement.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's have a look now. So they're starting to rush in now, so that's good. So
Last 10 minutes.
Can we use a new circuit to be added to a dual board, one side RCD protected and the other not? No main protective bonding present but supplementary bonding present, or does main protective bonding need to be installed? So yeah, if it's required, so if we have truly got extraneous conductive parts, typically service pipe work entering the building, then that will require main protective bonding. So yeah, again, we go back to our fundamental principle that says, you know, everything has to be adequate for the additions and alterations we're making, in particular the earthing and bonding arrangement. So that's right up front in chapter 1 in one of our key fundamentals. So always a consideration. So it's not always needed. So for example, in a lot of domestic now, we've got plastic services entering the building, and so main protective bonding is not required. But yeah, it's always a consideration, and if you have truly got extraneous conductive parts, then main protective bonding must be applied before we consider adding those new circuits. Okay, so with regards to cables installed in walls, do you have to put plastic capping, i.e. trunking, on it? Again, very common question. So so there's nothing in BS 7671 that says you have to put capping on, is there, Chris? Oh, sorry,
no.
I've just...
It's okay, it's no problem. Fine. I was just going to take a quick swing. No, there's nothing in BS 7671 at all, Sam. I think for a lot of guys, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way, it's a bit of a comfort blanket. If you think about the reasons why you may cap a cable in that scenario, the most common sense answer would be for protection, but plastic capping is not going to provide much protection at all. It is just a way of running the cable in. It's a bit of a comfort blanket, but in terms of compliance with BS 7671, which I suppose ultimately is what matters to us, there is no requirement. Metal, if obviously in an older standard of the regs or older amendment of the regs, then the metal with the suitable earthing, then that's a different scenario. But plastic capping, I think for a lot of people, it's just simply a comfort blanket.
Yeah, again, this was one of those things that, you know, when I was an apprentice and learning, because we saw it always being done, we thought it was a requirement. But basically, if you stay within your zones, if you RCD protect, then it's not a requirement. It's not a problem to add it, and a lot of people still do it by personal preference, just to give a little bit of protection against the plasterer's trowel in most cases. So yeah, different scenario if we, for example, are going less than 50 mil and we don't want to RCD protect it, for example, because it's a distribution circuit and we want to leave our 30 mil protection for downstream, then we might consider having proper additional protection, and that's where we would be looking at steel, typically 3 mil, but then again we've got to think about, are people going to use air powered tools, in which case 3 mil of steel probably isn't going to be adequate mechanical protection. So again, this is one of those where you made that great point about you've got to be considering the installation's requirements. They're not all the same. So yeah, if you know that they're not going to be using nail guns, then fine. 3 mil steel capping will probably be perfectly adequate to give it that mechanical protection to provide additional protection. So yeah, that's a possible. But yeah, plastic trunking, even though we've got RCD protection, even though we're running in the safe zones, not an issue, not a problem to provide it, but not a requirement to provide it.
No.
Let's see what else we've got. if not have RCD protection and plastic consumer unit, what do we need to write? Well, I think we talked a little bit about that, about the differences, scenarios that might result in C2s or C3s. Again, go to Best Practice Guide 4, freely downloadable, excellent information in there about our lack of RCD protection and some guidance on coding it. I've been asked to do an EICR for a static caravan. Anything I need to check for that's different from a normal domestic dwelling? Internally, probably not a lot of difference, although you just need to be conscious that it's not a building regulation constructed dwelling. It will be a manufactured caravan, so you might have a bit more metal work involved in the structure than normal, but in general nothing too different in terms of the dwelling, but you might have to look at how it's supplied, so whether that's a fixed connection from a feeder pillar, and the feeder pillar may be out on a camping or caravan type setup on a feeder pole. So yeah, that would be worth considering, looking at the environment, because it could be potentially different, but in general terms not 100% different from a typical dwelling, if that's what the static caravan's being used for. So I'm assuming by you saying static, it's not a true caravan, it's not got a hookup, it's not frequently moved, and it doesn't then need to comply with the special location requirements of a caravan. Anything you'd add to that one, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's basically a home without calling it a home, so there are a lot of similarities. If it's a transportable caravan, then that's different altogether. There's the BS 7671 requirement for the supply, and then there's a European requirement for the internal wiring of the caravan unit. So from a static caravan point of view, there's not much difference. I would just recommend during the inspection looking out for a lot more areas such as wear and tear, mechanical impact. These are still quite common. If you think of holiday homes where people go and hire them for the week, then they do tend to get a lot of abuse in terms of overuse and plugging in and cracked sockets, things like that. I would just look out for more wear and tear. Yeah,
that's fair comment. We've got another good one that again is very, very current. So once an EICR is carried out and one of the remedials is upgrading the consumer unit, do we then need to issue both an EIC and a satisfactory EICR, or is it acceptable to state on the EIC that an EICR has been carried out and list the works that have been done to bring the property to a satisfactory condition? So it's a really popular subject. The things to say completely up front is, so yeah, if you're changing the consumer unit, then that requires an installation certificate, because you've altered more than one circuit, even if you do nothing else other than install new protective devices for the existing final circuits. So definitely an installation certificate required for the change of a consumer unit. If we're talking about private rented sector dwellings now, then in order to meet the requirements of the PRS legislation, because we haven't done a complete rewire, and because we haven't done it's not a brand new installation, we've only changed the consumer unit, then that installation certificate isn't recognised as being meeting the legislation, the PRS legislation, and you would still need to provide a condition report that gives a true record of the test and inspection of the entire installation. So the advice often is that you can refer one to the other. So refer the installation certificate to the condition report, and say that you haven't completely documented inspection and test of existing final circuits on the installation certificate. You've only documented your consumer unit change. And then when you do the condition report, you're going to do a full inspection and test if that's what you've agreed with your customer of all the existing final circuits. But it's a situation where they're both required. So a lot of people say, but I normally test all of the final circuits when I do my consumer unit change. Great, and that's that's good, but it's not actually a requirement, and so you don't have to open up every accessory, for example, when you do that, but you might want to do that when you're doing a condition report if you agree that you're going to do 100% sampling. So they're two different forms for two different purposes, and in the instance under PRS where you're changing the consumer unit, you will need to provide both, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to duplicate the paperwork. You can link them together.
Absolutely. Yeah, just one thing to add to that, Sam, with regards to the installation certificate versus the condition report. The condition report assumes that the installation certificate is in place and is 100% accurate in terms of everything complies. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario. If the installation doesn't comply, then you need to obviously ensure it does comply, and then obviously you can link the certificates together. But yeah, you would need both for an installation where you've upgraded.
Yeah, and it's I think that's a bit of education that we need to get out to the landlords and to the letting agents, because we're getting a lot of calls about they won't accept my installation certificate, and this is the reason why, because there's nowhere officially to record on the installation certificate that it's satisfactory or unsatisfactory. On the installation certificate we're conforming compliance with BS 7671. The condition report is the one that says this installation is fit for continued use or safe for continued use. So there's a key difference, as you say. It's really good. You're picking me up really well, Chris. It's really good, because otherwise I'll just rant on and forget the key bits, which is, it's really good, really good. Okay, looking in now, we've rattled through time. It's always the quickest half hour of my week, I can tell you that definitely. So we'll just pick up a couple more. Let's have a look. What about PVC twin and earth cable ran on the surface in a garage or in a house? Should that have been trunking on it, even with RCD protection? Well, if it's surface mounted, it doesn't actually require the additional protection of an RCD. Obviously, RCDs will give it enhanced protection. You'll get a better, typically, disconnection time for a lower prospective fault currents, so it does give enhanced protection. It's not actually a requirement unless, of course, we're in TT land. So that's one of the things. Again, sometimes we might choose to run a distribution circuit surface mounted so that we don't have to use 30 milliamp RCDs to provide additional protection, and we can limit that to the ones downstream. So yeah, perfectly acceptable to run it on the surface. In a garage, you've just got to consider, is it suitable for the environment? So if we're talking about a typical domestic garage, it's out of the way, it's not sort of in the thoroughfare where it's likely to be impacted by the car, not an issue. So long as it's got sufficient mechanical protection in a domestic installation. I mean, if it was a general workshop garage, a commercial or industrial venture, you might want to think about giving it some additional protection, but typically twin and earth cable on the surface in a domestic environment has got enough mechanical protection without having to put it in trunking. So lastly then, we'll have a look. Can a minor works certificate be used when replacing a circuit breaker for an RCBO? What's your thoughts on that one, Chris?
Yeah, of course it can. If you're changing to the RCBO, then technically you're making an alteration to the circuit. You might call that nitpicky, but you are making an alteration. So yes, it would be acceptable because it's not a full installation, so to speak. It's not a new circuit. Therefore, it would be acceptable to use a minor works. Just make sure it's clearly identified. and that's really it. It's more than acceptable to use a minor works.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the minor works will let you document exactly what you've done. It will let you record the value of any inspection and test which is applicable, and it'll also give you a medium to be able to comment on anything else you might see in the installation. And those are three things that we also always think are valuable whenever we're doing some work. So yeah, minor works is really suited for that. We'll take one more then. So if one item of separated extra low voltage salve equipment is installed on the scheduled inspection, should the salve box for both basic and fault protection as a method of protection against electric shock be ticked? So here's another one, very, very common, you know, one of these ones where you see a schedule of inspection sheet and everything's ticked, and you look at the salve box. So if I'm just installing one item of separated extra low voltage equipment, should I be ticking that salve box, Chris?
No. I mean, the protection as a whole, and you can quote me on this because I haven't got the regs in front of me at the moment, SAM 414. So we'd be looking at ELV. That would be as an overview of protection, not just for one individual item. So no, it wouldn't be required to tick that.
Yeah. So if it were a whole circuit, or even if it may be a whole installation, then that's when we'd be ticking it. But yeah, as Chris says, for one item of equipment, then it's not required. Okay, we'll call a halt to that tonight. So thanks very much again. Some really great questions coming in. I hope you were happy with the ones that we picked and answered. There were an awful lot of questions in there tonight that we could have chose from. So do please keep sending them in, and we'll keep trying to as many possibly as we can. There'll be no Q&A next Monday, of course, because it's bank holiday, it's Easter Monday, so there'll be nothing. We'll be back again in a fortnight, so hopefully we'll see you all again then. PRS, just a few statements, because we get asked it regularly. Is there going to be any extension to the 1st of April date? No. You know, we've been in close contact with the government department that are in control of this, and no. So please tell your landlords, tell your housing associations that are asking you about that. We're not aware of any local authority giving any extensions to those. And yeah, if you haven't already, download your copy of Best Practice Guide 4. Yeah, really useful document, freely available. Lots and lots of good guide examples which will help you in that thought process of which way to go when you're looking at an installation. So thanks very much for tonight. Thanks for that, Chris. Enjoy that?
Yeah, no problem, Sam. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
That's really good to have you. Really good. Okay, well, thanks very much, people, and stay safe, and we'll hope to see you again soon.